So I just got in some red wiggler worms that I'm going to start to try and grow. And they just got shipped to me from a place that I bought them off of eBay. And I just wanted to show you how they come. They say here that the worms have traveled a long way. They may be a bit lethargic or tired upon arrival. Please give them time to adjust to their new homes. Let me know if there's any problems. From Saltia River Bait Company. So this is the company here. So let's see what we got here. Came with some instructions. Telling you this is kind of a worm guide. Came with a cold pack. They put a cold pack in there. Of course, it's now water, but at least they tried to keep it cool. And then I bought 2 pounds, and it's a sack like this. So I'm going to go ahead and open that sack up, and we're going to see what it looks like. Okay, so I'm just feeling in here. It feels warm and it feels moist, which is good. And the worms seem to be alive. And I ordered 2 pounds. I think it's like 1,000 red wigglers per pound. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate these 3 into 3 of these containers. And I'm going to start them on my rack system at the top. The reason that I want to start raising red wigglers as well as mealworms, and I've thought about this quite a while, is that inputs, I guess, for keeping them alive are things that I would normally throw away. Paper, scraps from the kitchen, things like that. My mealworms, on the other hand, require a very dry product called wheat bran that I have to buy on the internet right now because I can't find it locally. And so for me, I'm thinking that I may get out of the mealworm raising side of my operation and start to do red wigglers, because I can use things that I would normally throw away to feed them. They can use the same bins. They like the dark, and the ventilation on top will actually help them too, so they don't get it doesn't get too much fungus and things growing in the bins. It'll keep bugs out as well. And I can use the end result. You know, with mealworms, I've mentioned it's frass, which is their poop. Well, with red wigglers, they call it castings, and it's the stuff that they poop out that it's hard to distinguish from regular soil, but after a certain period of time, you can look at it and you can feel it, and it's going to have a crumbly texture to it, and it's finer. It's got a lot of finer texture. That is the castings, and I can use those castings in my garden. So for me, you know, I can use the mealworm frass in my garden too, but I don't have to pay anything to get the red wigglers to make the product that I'm going to be using. So I guess the bottom line is it's got less of a, there's less expense. There's less carbon footprint, because I'm only using things that I would have normally thrown away, and I'm preventing those from going into the landfills. And I can feed my chickens earthworms just as well as I can feed them mealworms. So I think for all those reasons, I'm going to start raising these red wigglers. And as I go through my bin system here and I start to move them from bin to bin, I may just, let the chickens eat the mealworms and then replace those bins with red wigglers. And the reason that I'm doing red wigglers and not night crawlers is red wigglers will stay on the top of the soil. I mean, well, they'll burrow a little bit, but they don't go as deep as night crawlers. So you get them to work on that mulching process that they're doing. They're composting essentially on their own. They'll do that within this narrow box a little easier than a night crawler. A night crawler is going to want to go down and burrow and stay on the bottom. A red wiggler will stay in this space and compost for you whatever you put in here, the paper or the fruits and vegetable skins or whatever it is. So that's why I'm using red wigglers. Before I put the red wigglers in the trays, what I want to do is put in some bedding material. And what I've done is I've gotten some shredded paper from my shred bin at the house, and I'm just going to pour some of this in each of the trays, and this is going to serve as the bedding for the worms. And as I shred more paper, I can add more to the tops so that they can compost it further. Just going to add that in there like that. All right. Now this paper, you know, I make sure I don't shred like plastic envelopes, things that have a clear see-through window. You know, I want it to be pure paper. It can be colored paper, that's fine, but I don't want it to be, you know, have plastics and things in there. You can also shred newspaper. Now this is going to be very dry for the worms, and the worms like a moist environment. I'm actually going to move some of this over here. The worms like a moist environment, so what you're going to want to do is to take a water bottle, and I have one here that I just filled with distilled water. And you're just going to want to spray this down. You kind of want to get it moist. You don't want it sopping wet, but you don't want it dry either. So I'm just going to spray. I'll just do one here. You kind of want to spray it to where when you squeeze the paper, a little bit of liquid may come out, but not a whole lot. You kind of mix it around here. You want to get it real evenly dampened. And that'll serve as a base. That'll serve as a base for the worms. And they'll compost this as they process the material. They'll create those worm castings, and this paper will become part of what is your worm castings and compostable material that you can put in your garden later. So as you can see, it's damp. There's no water coming out, but it's damp. And that's the thing you want to make sure when you're raising worms, is that you keep the box damp. I'll probably add a little bit more water here. Keep the box damp. You don't want it soaking wet, but you don't want it dry either. And you're going to have to be careful when you have these lids on there that have, they're exposed to the environment in this garage, because they will dry out over time. So once you have that moistened, then you'll take your worms and just pour, a third. I'm just going to pour a third in here. Roughly. Oops. It's hard to do this with one hand. All right. So I got roughly a third in there. And I'll spread that out over the paper. Kind of spread the worms out a little bit too. You don't want them all clumped up in one spot. Just like that. All right. Now, if I just put the lid on, it's going to have too much air exposure and it's going to dry out the material. Oh, one more thing I forgot. I'm going to add to the top a little bit more soil, and this is just all natural garden soil. So I'm just going to add a little bit of this to the top. All right. So then I'll spread this out. Now, you want this to be damp too, because this is really dry. It's been in that bag for a while, open, exposed, and so just going to dampen this too with your sprayer. All right. Now, even though I've dampened this pretty well, if I just put this lid on, if I just put the lid on like that, there's too much surface area here that's exposed to this room, and with my dehumidifier over there, it's gonna essentially suck out too much moisture. Now, I have to use a dehumidifier in my garage because otherwise it gets really muggy in here, and it can create fungus growing on my boxes. It's also not good for my mealworms that I'm also growing. So I've got to strike a balance between keeping the box moist, keeping these earthworm boxes more damp than I would my mealworm boxes. So one thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put these egg flat crates on top. And you can see it kind of fits nicely in this box. It's a little snug. And I created a second one here. I'm going to put over it like this. Now, these egg crate cartons will prevent some of that surface evaporation, but they're also a dry material. So what I'm going to do to keep these damp is I'm going to spray them with water too, okay? Just kind of get them damp enough that the water will drip down. Into the box over time. So it creates like these little water reservoirs in where the eggs would normally sit. That'll drip into that soil and keep the box damp without over dampening it. All right. And every couple of days or so, depending on how much evaporation I've got going on, I'm going to want to come and check these and add more water. All right. So now that I have this damp, now I can add my lid. All right. And that way the earthworms will stay moist under these egg carton flats, and I won't be in danger of them drying out and dehydrating. So once you have your egg crate cartons dampened and on top of your soil, what you're going to want to do from time to time, and you can wait a little bit, you know, the worms are going to start by munching on the paper that we put on the bottom. And once that starts to go down a little bit, you know, after maybe let's say a week or so, you can start to add some food scraps to the top of the soil here underneath the egg crate. Now, you don't want to put a whole lot of stuff in there because it'll start to go bad before the worms have a chance to crawl up and start to munch on it. So you want to kind of, you know, spread it out. You want to add some to each of these trays, just, you know, kind of mashed up enough to where they have a food source, but you're not inundating them with too much that food will start to spoil. Now, what do you do with the excess scraps? The scraps that you can't put in your bins because they don't fit. Well, those I put in my composter outside that I have. It's a black tumbler composter. I'll put those in that one without worms so that can start to compost just in the heat and with the material that's already in there. So you want to have a composter that's doing most of your composting, and then the worms will help you out with doing additional composting, but also creating those worm casting that you can use in your garden. So it's just another way to get rid of excess stuff that you would normally throw away in the trash. So anyway, that's just something I wanted to point out before I close these things up. And as you can see, the lids still close on them, even though I've got them kind of full to the brim. Now, the reason that I put these lids on them is to prevent bugs from getting out, but it's also to prevent the worms from crawling out. You know, the worms should be satisfied with the material that I have in the bottom of these bins so that they won't be tempted to want to crawl out, but they can crawl up the sides and try to get out of these boxes. So I want to put these lids on to prevent that from happening. And then I'll just put the boxes, these trays, as I mentioned, I'll just put them back in my tower here, and I'll just add the other two. And then as I see that the material is going down, I'll probably only add, like I'll take this out and only add one side, make one side damp, and the other side I'll keep a little less damp, a little more exposed, so the worms are tempted to crawl to the side that's damp, and I'll put the food source underneath this egg flat over here, so that after about a week, all the worms will crawl over and be on this side and not on this side, so that this side will just be pure worm castings that I can then just pick up and throw into a bucket to add to my garden. So that's an easy way to separate your worms from the castings, is after they've processed the material for let's say 2.5 months or so, then you can just make one side, your damp side, just put this in on one side and add your food scraps underneath it, and the worms will crawl eventually over to this side only, and you can pull this out and it'll just be pure worm castings. So I'm going to use that strategy later on, but for now I'm just letting them do their thing in here, keeping this moist and letting them process the material and the paper and whatever food scraps I end up adding. Now you can look online for the types of things you can add as food scraps. You can do fruits, vegetables, coffee grinds. There's a lot of things. I would avoid meat, and I would avoid, meat will spoil quicker and it'll smell bad, so I want to avoid meat for that reason. I'll also avoid citrus because they don't process citrus very well. It'll also increase the acidity of the soil, and you don't want that. You want to keep the pH in a certain range. So lemon rinds and orange rinds and things aren't a good type of material to put in here. But everything else, you can read up online on that, and you can see what else you can put in there and what you can't. But pretty much anything organic can go in there, aside from citrus. And red wigglers will do their business and keep you with a bunch of good soil that you can use in your garden. So that's the hope, at least. This is a project. I've never tried this before. I've never vermicomposted before, which is worm composting. We'll see if it works or not. You'll see with me in the next few months if this is a worthwhile endeavor. But I kind of wanted to get out of just mealworm farming alone and have this as another way to process some of the material that I would otherwise throw away and minimize the amount of material I've got to add as inputs for the creating the worms that I want to feed to my chickens. So we'll see how it goes. I'll keep you posted. In the meantime, check out some of my other videos below, and thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give a thumbs up below. You can also check out one of my other videos here, and stay up to date by subscribing to my YouTube channel right here. Until next time, I'll see you on the ranch.